everyone. My name is Sara Minkara, and I'm the U.S. Special Advisor on International Disability Rights. It's an honor to be with you all here today virtually. I wish I was with you in person. As the Special Advisor on International Disability Rights, I lead with my team the U.S. Government Foreign Policy on Disability, advancing the rights of persons with disability across the globe, the 1.3 billion individuals in this world with a disability. And this is why it's so important for us to be here today to commemorate Mark Bookman's life through this documentary, Mark, A Call to Action. I first want to thank Mrs. Misako for bringing us together, the embassy, the director for this documentary, Ron Small, and everyone that was involved in bringing us all together. First, I want to send my wishes and prayers and thoughts to the lives lost during the earthquake early January. Our hearts are with you, our minds, our prayers, and I hope everyone is doing okay. As we are sitting here and we watch and listen and hear to the documentary, to the life and impact and purpose that Mark Bookman brought forward to the disability community globally, but especially in Japan, I want us to really recognize the value that he brought forward. The inclusion of persons with disability, it's not just a right thing to do. It brings value to our economy, our peace and security, our efforts across the world, across the systems, across the structures, across society at large. We need to talk about disability when it comes to climate action. We need to talk about disability when it comes to food security. We need to talk about disability when it comes to infrastructure, AI, and beyond. And this is what Mark did through his work, through his efforts. He uplifted the voices of persons with disability and showcased to the world that our voices are not just needing to be taken care of and protected, but our voices need to be heard, valued, and brought to the table. Let's all celebrate his impact, celebrate his life, celebrate what he's been able to bring forward through this documentary, through this meetup, and beyond. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope we take his work forward and truly believe nothing without us, nothing without the disability community.
People need to meet people with disabilities, and they need to experience and see, and we're just like everybody else.
So my life is kind of like a puzzle. No matter what I want to do, my life is entangled with the lives of 100 other people in 100 different specialties.
There are certain students that you see that can become the future advocates and allies, and Mark is an incredible candidate for that and is currently pursuing that at the highest level.
He had a family that if he had an obstacle, they just figured it out and they just kept moving, and I think he sort of lives that way.
He does not use his disability as a barrier. He actually uses it as something that opens doors to him and to other people.
I was amazed by his Japanese skills.
そうですね、大体みんなはこういうバリアフリーがないということはあまり見えないんですね。
He speaks better Japanese than I do.
Japan is becoming a leader in accessibility on the global stage. And that means that it's going to help transform inclusion for disabled persons across the world.
When we are able to recognize that disability is part of being human, the world will be a better place for everyone.
To place the issues of persons with disabilities in the framework of human rights, that is still very much missing.
They don't want to be put in a corner. They don't want to be put on a pedestal. They don't want to be talked down to. They don't want to be children their whole life.
Part of our identity is being a disabled person, not a person with disabilities.
Accessibility isn't just the story of someone who's overcome this moment of adversity. These things are happening every single day all over the world, and there are people that can really help us move the needle to try to get a better global understanding of access.
Everyone one day will become disabled. We are all getting older. None of us know where we're going to be in 10, 20, 30 years. What types of accidents, injuries, illnesses might befall us.
On April 20th, 1991, Mark Ross Bookman was born in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, 16 weeks prematurely. He weighed just over 1 pound, 10 ounces.
His head was the size of like a lime. He had a lot of muscle issues, and considering what our options were, being blind, severely cognitively impaired, physically impaired, death, they were all on the table. Very, very real on the table. It was life-changing for both of us and his mom, minute by minute for months at a time. We had that through his prematurity, and then we had a little bit of a lull after he was out of the woods from a prematurity standpoint.
After 104 days in the neonatal intensive care unit, Mark was ready to come home. He still needed supplemental oxygen for an additional 6 weeks, but now at 6 pounds, 12 ounces, Paul and Debbie hoped for the best, and Mark appeared to be a normal kid.
From a very, very early point, I saw in him his drive, his desire, his unwillingness to give in, and his absolutely brilliant mind.
For a while, it seemed as if I might progress. I might eventually catch up and reach milestones that other children my age had long surpassed. I would eventually reach what it would be to be a quote-unquote normal kid.
And then when Mark was around in 2nd grade, we noticed that his muscle skills were deteriorating. In other words, he would fall before, but now he's falling a little bit more often.
Instead of catching up, I started falling further behind. My muscle tone started to deteriorate.
And they said, well, this is all due to his prematurity. And I remember thinking, it can't be, because it shouldn't progress. I mean, if it was due to his prematurity, it would level off, but it wouldn't get worse. He'd learn to compensate, or it would just stabilize. But he was getting worse. So both his mom and I refused to accept that as an answer.
And I remember from the time that I was, 6, 7, 8, spending a lot of time jumping around medical appointments as the doctors tried to figure out just what was going on.
We were referred to Dr. Warren Grover, a physician at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children in Philadelphia. We take Mark down there, and again, this is probably after maybe 20 different doctors evaluating him, all saying the same thing. And we bring him there, and I remember he spent some time with Mark. He goes, let's go out in the hall, I want to watch you walk. So he watches Mark walk down the hall. Mark falls a few times. I go to pick him up. No, don't pick him up. I need to see him get up on his own. So as a parent, tears are running down my face. I can't help my kid, but I understand the diagnostic reasons for it. And he's watching this, okay, let's go to the stairs. I want to see Mark on a stair or two. And then he watches Mark walk back, and we come sit in his office, and he goes, I don't know what this is. He goes, it's not his prematurity. He goes, but I can tell you this. He said, I will spend as much time as necessary to find out what he has. He goes, but it's not his prematurity. There's something else going on here. He goes, it's going to involve probably a fair amount of testing. It's not going to happen overnight, but I promise you I will get to the bottom of it.
For nearly 6 months, Mark was subjected to ongoing invasive testing, including EEGs, EMGs, and spinal taps. Ultimately, a deep core muscle biopsy, a surgical procedure to remove a piece of muscle close to his thigh bone, was performed, finally yielding some clues.
Then that's what gives us a diagnosis, and he calls us up and he goes, okay, I kind of got good news and bad news. The good news is the biopsy yielded some really good results for what he has. The not so great news is what he has. And he explained that it was a variant of this rare class of diseases. It's such an unknown because at that time, we're really only aware of around 6 cases in the country with this. But based on the microscopic analysis of that biopsy, this is what it is.
I have a condition called glycogen storage disease type 4 rare variant, or at least that's what the doctors have come to call it. alongside a number of other names. I've heard Bookman syndrome thrown around a couple times. But essentially, the way that my condition works is kind of like an ALS or a muscular dystrophy, in that it's a progressive muscular disease where over time, my body gradually weakens.
So he goes, this is what we've got, this is what we have to look out for, and we'll just take it from there.
With a long-term prognosis still a mystery, Mark's muscles began to weaken. The first muscle to fail was his heart. In 1999, Paul and Debbie sought out renowned pediatric cardiologist Dr. Richard Donner at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
We were, of course, concentrating on the heart and symptoms of a failing heart.
But I really appreciate everybody coming out, especially so early. And obviously, my two kids will be grateful, and other children across the country, which eventually we're convinced will find some type of cure for this. We're all indebted to you, and I thank you a lot.
By the time that I was 10, going out on a field trip one day, walking around and just being extremely exhausted all the time, very kind of sensitive to the heat, just wanting to sit down and do nothing. While my friends were all playing around and jumping and skipping, I was just exhausted.
When you're dealing with a child of maybe 5 years of age or greater, the symptoms are similar to, not exactly the same, but similar to those that you might see in an adult. And those are things like shortness of breath, inability to exercise or play the way their friends do, laying back a little bit, taking longer to get from one place to another, and noticeably breathing somewhat harder at the time. And there are many, many reasons for that. One could have a simple cold, but someone recognized that it wasn't simple and referred Mark to us.
The morning after this field trip, I believe it was, I had woken up. I felt horrible. My heart was racing. My body was, crumbling. I was sweating. I was exhausted first thing in the morning, even though I'd slept all night. I went to my mom and told her, look, Mom, I'm not feeling well. I think I should stay home from school today. And my mom looks at me, and from what I've heard from her side of the story, it was, the veins in my neck were like popping out. I was really flushed, obviously, like physically not doing well. She said, ask your father, see what he has to say. So I went to my dad and said, Dad, I'm not feeling well. Can I stay home from school today? My dad turns around to me and says, get your ass out of bed, get dressed, you're going to school, quit whining. And I go to my mom, and Mom says, and Dad says I gotta go. She looks at me one more time and is like, no, we're going to the hospital. So she takes me to the ER at the nearby hospital, and I've got a resting heart rate of like 140. I'm in full-blown heart failure at this point, and I will never let my dad live down that get your ass out of bed and get to school comment. To this day, I make sure he remembers just how much of an ass he was on a daily basis.
We measure his progress or lack of progress as time goes on. And eventually we begin to talk about other therapies if we see that we're running out of options, or the options are just not satisfactory. And eventually we get to the point where we introduce for the very first time the concept of heart replacement.
Now, after that day, I remember spending the better part of 2 months in a couple different rooms of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, waiting for a heart transplant. And my daily experiences there were pain, for lack of a better term. My body was declining, heart rate was racing, physically exhausted, tired all the time. And, you know, even though there was a playroom not too far from my hospital room where I would play video games and try and distract myself from everything going on, I would run into other children who were on the same floor as me, grappling with their own sets of issues. I remember developing friendships with them when I was in the hospital. And I remember just how hard those friendships were when almost everyone around me passed away. You know, here I am, a 10-year-old kid, sitting in the hospital every day. Oh, I'm sorry, you know, Stephen next door has died. The people who got their transplants, got whatever they needed to get out of the hospital, I would hear stories for months and years later. Sorry, Patrick has died. You know, and as a young kid, I was just surrounded by not only my own kind of physical deterioration, but the deterioration of others around me.
Children's Hospital of Philadelphia sent a team by air to the hospital where the donor was, and they had to go there to evaluate that heart. So here you've got parents with their 10-year-old son not saying, I'll see you in a couple hours, saying goodbye, I may not see you again.
Mark is then prepared. He goes into the operating room long before the heart gets there. The chest is opened and all the preparations are made to take his heart out as soon as the donor heart gets there.
This whole ordeal is like 6 hours, 7 hours, this surgery. He gets his heart June 27, 2001.
The process of transplanting a child, both before and after transplant, is quite different than an adult. Children tend to be very, very social. They want to be normal, they want to fit in, they don't want to be designated as being different, which incidentally has led at one point to many suicides in children, suicide by not taking your medicines. Mark, however, did not take that route. He said, I have what I have, and I'm going to make it what it is, and I am going to I'm not going to let it run my life, but I am going to adjust with it and not fight it, not try to enter the normal world. I don't expect to be able to, but I am going to make this work for me.
It led me to develop a sense of empathy, a sense of solidarity, a sense of community with all these people who were dealing with their own challenges. And it also led me to develop an interest in philosophy, history, religion, you know, different areas of life that would let me question why this was happening to us and what those experiences would mean. It didn't derail me, it defined me.
Oh my God.
Rachel Stacy Bookman was born November 16, 1993 in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. She weighed 7 pounds.
She looks great. She looks beautiful.
Debbie and I had our daughter Rachel, who was born on time. She tried to come out prematurely, not as early as Mark, but the doctors were kind of on top of it and they were able to hold her off inside until she was fully baked.
She looks big.
I remember them taking Rachel out. It was another C-section. I was like, oh my God, she's huge, she's grotesque. Look at the sizes. But she was still a small baby. It was all relative. But it's like, okay, you know, I'm like, how is she? She's normal, she's great, everything's fine. I'm like, oh, thank God. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
For a number of years of Rachel's early childhood, Paul and Debbie were lulled into a false sense of security as she was born healthy, until she started showing telltale signs they both recognized from Mark's disease.
My muscle weakness was noticeable by my parents when I was in elementary school. When I was in middle school, I would notice that it would just take me longer to get places than my peers.
We realized that, you know, Rachel kind of walks a little funny. Rachel kind of can't skip like other girls. She can't jump. And we're thinking, okay, well, I'm not an athlete. Debbie was an athlete. I guess we just don't have very athletic kids.
My brother had his heart transplant when he was 10.
Rachel is 7 years old when Mark receives his new heart in 2001. At the same time, Paul and Debbie learn they are pregnant with a third child. With at least a 25% chance Rachel could be afflicted with Mark's disease, they schedule a deep core muscle biopsy to be sure.
On September 11th of 2001, as everybody remembers that date, Rachel was on the operating room at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia the minute the first plane hit the World Trade Center. I remember, my wife and I were sitting in the waiting area watching the TV, and we see this first plane hit the tower. And everybody's like, oh my God, what a freak accident. And then we see the second plane hit. And then they shut the hospital down immediately because, if everybody remembers, no one knew what was going on. They closed the airspace. Everybody's getting ready for some mass assault on the United States. The doctors come running out. She's already on the table. She's already under anesthesia. We're going to finish the procedure. So don't worry about it. Everything's okay. So we're sitting there, and again, no one knows what's happening in the world. And then they finished up. We take her home. We go home, and the phone rings around 9:30 at night. And I pick up the phone, and it's one of the doctors who was helping us. And he said, Paul, it's David. I'm like, hi, David. He goes, we got the results back, and I'm like, yeah. And he goes, she's got it. Excuse me a minute. And I remember just dropping the phone, dropping to my knees. And then I thought, I can't believe this, not again. And again, Debbie and I we were uniform in our decision that if Rachel had it, we would terminate the pregnancy. So when we got that news, all I could think about was my daughter will have to go through the same thing. And then at the same time, I was losing a third child I hadn't even had yet. So that was probably one of, if not the roughest day of my life.
My sister and I have the same condition, although we progressed at very different rates. And because of that, we've had very different lives. And she did not have the muscle tone issues that I did growing up. So when I was inside reading philosophy, she was outside playing sports, engaged in crew practice, doing things that I couldn't. And because of that, we had very different lives. That is, until her disability eventually caught up with her.
Rachel starts college at Temple University in Philadelphia. And in spite of early signs of heart failure, new medications helped her heart last longer until she transfers to the University of Miami.
So when I went to Miami, my second semester freshman year, I started with a mobility scooter. I was there 6 weeks. I rushed a sorority, Tri Delta, and the night we got, initiation, the day before I was told that I was in full-blown heart failure and had to go home. And I'm like, well, I'm getting initiated and then I'll go home after. And so I flew home and they put me on the transplant list. And so before they listed me, went back, packed up my dorm, said goodbye to my friends.
And she couldn't deny or ignore it anymore.
I went into the hospital full-time from June to August, had my transplant in August. And then I was off for a semester. Doctors wanted me home for for a year, but I fought, and they're like, okay, well, if you finish all your physical therapy, cardiac therapy, all that sort of stuff, then you can go back in January. So I did that, went back to Miami in January, started using a cane. So I take the mobility scooter to the building, park outside the classroom, use a cane to get seated. That's what I did until I went into a wheelchair and I graduated in 2018.
Mark was always much more mature beyond his years. When Mark was 2-year-old, 3 years old, his vocabulary, everything about it just far exceeded other people his age group. He was a little man at age 2. I mean, literally a full-grown man at age 2.
Mark Bookman was probably the most precocious kid that I had ever met. He was, I guess he was 11 or 12 years old when I met him, but he may as well have been a 50-year-old guy. He kind of looked like Jerry Lewis. He had this like little Jerry Lewis look to him. And he drove teachers crazy because he probably knew a little bit more about whatever they were teaching than they did. If he didn't know it when they first broached it, he did his research, and the next day in class, he knew like anything, any sort of novelty, any sort of like weird angle of what they were teaching. And he made sure that you knew that he knew it. He wouldn't rest until he said, you know, you mentioned this thing over here, but did you know that actually, he was an actually guy.
The lines blurred between how you talk to a 3 or 4-year-old who literally has the mental capacity and the vocabulary of a 15, 16-year-old boy. So very early on, Mark and I just developed this relationship, this banter, this sarcasm.
At the time, I was going to school to become a teacher. And I got to know Mark because they needed somebody to be a one-on-one assistant. I didn't want to be a one-on-one assistant because I wanted to work into a classroom with a lot of kids. So the principal came up to me and said, so we have this kid coming in. He needs a wheelchair sometimes. It's electric. He does not want a one-on-one. And every classroom he's in needs air conditioning. They were in all air conditioning at the time. I said, sold. So I got to know Mark by being a one-on-one aide for a kid who did not want a one-on-one aide.
It was a mini-me kind of situation. That's the way, you know, I felt about him. And other people couldn't understand him. His own mother couldn't understand him. But Mark and I just had this understanding, and we would look at each other and we would know exactly either what to say, or we knew exactly what the other person was thinking.
My days were literally chasing Mark Bookman around the campus. He had a scooter, and the scooter had a speed of like 1 to 10. I wanted the speed to be on 5, Mark wanted the speed to be on 10. So one day I took it and I'm like, Mark, we're done with this. So I put it right in the middle, this like slow speed, put a cap over it, put a piece of tape on it. It's the end of the day, there's a long walkway for us to go home. When Mark was done for the day, I was done for the day. So I wanted to get out of here just as badly as he did. So Mark gets on his scooter, I'm walking next to him. He's going maybe like half a mile an hour, and the entire way up the walkway, just staring at me. You proud of yourself?
Mark was probably around 3, I guess, three or so. One of my closest friends literally bought the house across the street. He was a roommate of mine from graduate school. He moves in, has a son within 2 months of Debbie and me having Mark. One day we're going somewhere and he's driving, and he and I are in the front seat and the 2 boys are in the back seat. And I just remember his son's in the back seat kind of going, you know, just making like noise like a 2 or 3-year-old, you know, child would do. And my son's in the back giving some political discourse on some event that just happened. And my friend's engaging Mark this whole time. And he looked at me, he goes, I swear to God, I think there's like a 30-year-old in the back seat instead of a 3-year-old.
As far as Paul's concerned, Mark can do anything in the world. And I think that Mark believed that he could do anything in the world, and I think that Mark is proving that he could do anything in the world, including changing it.
There was no doubt in my mind, whatever he put his mind to, it would be at the top of the game, no matter what he decided to do.
Mark didn't have any barriers for a kid who should have had a lot of barriers.
As a young teenager, Mark discovered Japanese anime through its characters dealing with disability and often using technology to overcome obstacles.
I wanted to learn more about these disabled bodies that I was seeing strewn all over, you know, Japanese anime. Was disability more common in Japan? Was it something that, you know, I would find more acceptance of what I was going through, or more resources to help me deal with what I was going through.
Mark is really into Full Metal Alchemist, Ghost in the Shell, those kind of anime and manga, where you have protagonists that have cybernetic prostheses or magic prostheses or some sort of body augmentation that grants them certain abilities, but also almost in exchange as a price provides them with certain kinds of social anxieties as to what they are having had those prosthetics.
Anime spoke to Mark in a way that Western cartoons could not. Early in high school, a special teacher cements his future.
I get to high school where I'm finally able to take classes on philosophy and Japan. And I have one teacher in particular, named Miss Charlotte Ushioda, who became my first Japanese teacher. In taking classes with her, I remember being very excited because I got to watch anime in class for the first time. It was as if it was becoming a real part of my education. I remember, having my first Japanese lessons with her. So this was a real chance for me to kind of cement my interest. And just as I'm coming into learning more about Japan, and I'm also taking courses in philosophy on the side in high school as electives, we start coming up towards the summer of my junior year. I had decided I was going to learn how to play a guitar.
Mark came to me and he said, I know what I'm going to do for the summer. And I'm like, okay, that's great. What are you going to do? He says, I'm going to take guitar lessons. I'm like, that's fantastic. That's great. You have two options on the table, which is either you get a job or you go to summer school.
But guitar was not one of them. So I was a really angsty and rebellious teenager. I was like, fuck you, old man. I'm going to go as far away as possible.
He went ballistic. This is BS. You can't make me do this. I can do what I want. I'm like, not when I'm paying for it. You can't. Then I'm going to find someone who's going to pay for it. I'm like, you know what? If you can find someone to pay for it, do whatever the hell you want.
So without telling him, I decided to speak to my high school Japanese teacher, and I applied for a scholarship that would let me study in Japan for a couple months.
3 months later, I'm in my dental office, and one of my front desk people comes back. Dr. Bookman, there's a phone call for you. They said they need to speak to you. It's about your son. And I'm like, all right, what did he do now? And I'm like, who is it? They said, I don't know, some Japanese minister or something like that. I was like, what?
My dad gets a call from the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they say, well, we have some questions about your son's application. We see here that he's disabled. Is he going to be able to come?
He mentioned he had a heart transplant and he takes a lot of medications. And I'm like, where are we going with this? And they said, well, he applied for this program and he's extremely well qualified for it, but we just have some health questions. And they asked me a few questions, can he take his own medications? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, well, we'd like to accept him into the program. I'm like, that's great. What program is this?
Suffice it to say that after that conversation, of which my dad had no knowledge that phone call was going to be coming, he and I had a conversation. Some words were expressed, and by expressed, I mean yelled at each other.
I said, well, they want you in. He goes, that's great. I said, were you going to tell me about it? Well, I figured if I got it, you'd find out eventually. So we talked a little bit about it, and I'm like, okay, you did exactly what I had said.
Eventually, we reached an agreement, and Dad allowed me to travel to Japan for the first time in the summer of 2008. I was able to live and experience the life that I'd been watching from afar via anime and the bits of internet research that I'd done for so many years ahead of time. I remember going out to cafes and karaoke shops and just hanging out with high school friends I'd met in Japan. At this time, I was still walking, albeit with a bit of a limp. So I was still able to enjoy all these different places. So I enjoyed Japan. I deepened my love for the culture. I decided, okay, I'm now fully committed to this. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to study Japan. That's going to be my life. It wasn't until my second study abroad experience that I really began to realize that there are some barriers out there for persons with disabilities. So in 2012, I traveled to Sofia University via an American Study Abroad program called CIEE, the Council on International Educational Exchange. Now, as an American Study Abroad program, they were following guidelines laid out by the Americans with Disabilities Act and therefore provided me with reasonable accommodations. They went out of their way before I went to find housing for me, to set up transit between my apartment and class, to make sure that I would have access to classroom accommodations, that I wouldn't have to handwrite because I wouldn't be able to. They set in place the concrete measures that would make my life possible. And I only learned later on that I was the first wheelchair user they'd ever taken. They had no idea how to navigate these systems before I had come. And in fact, they weren't legally even obligated to under Japanese law, because back in 2012, it was not a requirement in Japan to provide those accommodations. Still, because of their investment and because of their time and commitment to making sure I would have an equal experience, I was able to get my apartment and I was able to travel to campus. For the most part, my life was uninterrupted. But what I did realize is that if I ever took even the slightest step off of the path that had been laid out for me, I would run into barriers. I realized that all the places that I used to go were no longer accessible to me. But even though I couldn't go everywhere, I had enough at my university, in my apartment, to continue my study, to deepen my interest in Buddhism and philosophy, and to set myself down a course that would firm my involvement in Japanese studies more broadly.
In 2014, Mark graduated summa cum laude from Villanova University. His major was Global Interdisciplinary Studies.
I wrote a thesis comparing Western philosophy with Japanese Buddhism and decided that I really wanted to continue working on Japanese Buddhism.
After Villanova, Mark was awarded a prestigious Fulbright scholarship to study Buddhism at Toyo University in Tokyo. He was the first Fulbright wheelchair user to ever study abroad in Japan. But during his Fulbright, he quickly realized his wheelchair kept him from having any access to Buddhist temples, and he famously said,
"Why do I care what monks think if I'm not getting in the front door?"
Now it was time for Mark to take a new direction. Disability studies became his passion.
I have this treasure trove of resources around disability, the connections that I'm starting to build up and make that could meaningfully provide the answers that I was searching for, not just for myself, but how do I make sure that others have access to that information? Before long, I'm not just talking to my own classroom. I'm talking to major corporations, talking to government organizations. I'm talking with Her Imperial Highness Princess Takamado of Japan at a youth forum dedicated to international inclusion.
In 2015, Mark began a master's and then PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania.
When I got to Penn, I knew I was going to be studying disability. But disability is a broad, very interdisciplinary topic, and there are so many ways to study it, I wasn't even quite sure where to start, honestly.
While at University of Pennsylvania, Mark launched a mobile accessibility digital mapping project that highlighted physical and social barriers on college campuses. His course of study under Professors Jolyon Thomas and Ayako Kano was his dissertation, Politics and Prosthetics, 150 Years of Disability in Japan.
And in that several hundred-page document, I traced who's been involved in making decisions around access and inclusion, who's been left behind, why, and what we can do to make sure that they are included going forward.
There's tremendous effort that went into that, tremendous labor that went into what he did, because it's one thing to decide, oh, I'm going to study about the history of disability, but to do that in the Japanese language, we knew Mark would be the one person who could do it, and he did it. So in that sense, yeah, it's not surprising, but it's remarkable.
His hard work and newfound notoriety paid off when he was offered and accepted a full-time position as postdoctoral fellow at the University of Tokyo.
The University of Tokyo is the most prestigious, the oldest national university of Japan. It is absolutely necessary to employ him because he is very brilliant, he is very talented, and he is a very interesting man.
This is my daughter, Sora. She's 22 years old, and a few hours after her birth, we realized that she had something called an unbalanced translocation. And for her, what that means is she's got a little bit too much of the short arm of chromosome number 4 and not enough of 22. But because 22 is such a small chromosome, her main diagnosis is trisomy 4p. She was born just like any other child. She was fine, but she had some quirks in her anatomy that was visible to the doctors, and that's why when she was born, we ran the blood tests and found out that she had this variation in her chromosomes.
When I was growing up, I was very aware of the fact that I had a disability because I needed to use a cane, I needed to read Braille, I needed to do certain things that people around me did not have to do. There are not any individuals with disabilities in my family, and I did not have any friends with disabilities. And I did not want to be associated with people with disabilities when I was growing up. I didn't want to be one of those people. I wanted to fit in, like so many young people do. I didn't want to stick out. I wanted to be myself, and I didn't want my disability to be part of that.
I am originally from Canada. I have cerebral palsy, so I was born with a disability. I had a feeling that for some reason that when I turned 6, I'd all of a sudden stop being disabled. I don't know why that was, but I was a bit of a shock, I guess, when I turned 6 and I was still disabled.
I have a unilateral hearing loss, so I'm deaf on my right ear, and I have some hearing and some loss in my left ear. Technically speaking, I'm profoundly deaf, which is the medical term for the kind of deafness I have in my right ear. And so I grew up just, that's how I was from birth, so it's not like I experienced a loss over time, that's just kind of who I was. And I also wore what was called an FM unit, a kind of hearing aid that a teacher would wear a mic, and I would wear a kind of box around my chest with a little antenna. And that was helpful in some ways, but it drew a lot of attention from the other kids.
I was born and raised in a very rural area in Hiroshima. And when I was 19 years old, I broke my neck and became disabled. So now I'm 69, so I have been in a wheelchair for about a half century.
In this area, especially in Tokyo, environment or transportation, including transportation and the people's mind, thinking better than before. But when you go to local areas, it's still hard to get around, and maybe some bias about disabled people.
I think I tried to compensate for my troubles socializing with academic excellence. And so I I loved school. I loved the classes in school. I would read the textbooks during the summer before the school year. So I could be 100% prepared for the entire school year to come.
The summer between my junior and senior years of high school, I went to a summer camp type program for blind high school students who are interested in STEM careers. And that was my first introduction to the disability community and actually liking it, because other times I would go to these different events that were specifically for disabled people, and I didn't want to be there so much that I was very close-minded to the idea. I didn't want to be part of that world. I didn't want my friends to not like me because I was one of those people. And so when I had my first taste and I was actually being receptive to what was going on around me, I got to see so many blind people learning, being professionals, being professors, being scientists, being engineers, doing all of these fantastic things that once I chose to be observant, once I chose to learn, there was this whole world opened up to me.
I came here for the first time in 2000, and then I came back a number of times because I realized that Japan was a place I could visit with my disability. And every time I came back, the accessibility was better. The places I couldn't go to before, I was able to go to the next time. Stations I couldn't use before, I could use them the next time I came. And I was really impressed that that accessibility was progressing at such a rapid speed. I felt that I wanted to come and live here, so I moved here in 2007.
So right now, it's kind of a building with no foundation. It's a very beautiful building. In talking about the accessibility in Tokyo, maybe it's top of the world. But almost all stations has an elevator, and almost all buses are low floors, and taxi cab is accessible taxi cab is starting to operate. The physical accessibility is very good, but there's no foundation of the rights of people with disabilities.
Having a disability can be very isolating. And when someone comes up to you and says, I don't know how you do it, I can't imagine what it would be like to have a child like Sora. What they're doing is they're taking an isolated person and making them even more isolated.
Having a disability is inclusive of the human experience. And a lot of times when we hear about people with disabilities, we don't know the right words to say. We don't know the language to use. We're anxious, we're nervous, we don't want to offend, we want to be helpful, we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. And so all of these reactions make us shy away from getting to know a very richly diverse and extraordinarily talented community.
Every day, I rely on a caregiver to help get me into my wheelchair. I drive it across my architect-designed apartment, take the medicine laid out by my nurse, go outside, follow a street path, get to a train station where I use a government-issued disability pass, where an attendant pulls out a ramp for me. I get to my destination, and there I rely on the relevant staff. Everywhere I go, no matter what I want to do, my life is entangled with the lives of 100 other people in 100 different specialties.
On April 18, 2017, Mark and Rachel's mother, Debbie, dies of pancreatic cancer. Though Paul and Debbie had divorced years earlier, Paul and Rachel cared for Debbie in her final months. Paul ultimately remarried Dr. Wesna Debug, an orthodontist and war refugee from Iraq.
At that point, Deb and I had been divorced for several years. In the interim, I had met another woman who very early on just established an amazing relationship with Mark, which continues to this day.
He just does not think of his physical disability as being a problem or an issue. No, he is using it to make life better for other people more than for him.
She treats these children as if they were her own and would do anything in the world for them.
My stepmom and I, we did a 5K. It was so fun. She went on the back of my wheelchair. And so she did it the smart way. And so I just did the 5K and she was like, everyone move out of the way, move out of the way. I'm like honking my horn, got my lights on.
And I'm just very grateful that they all really have this type of relationship. It's very special, I think, for all of us.
There's lots of data coming out around the world about the economic impact of accessibility. You can look up like the purple pound in the UK, which researches that quite a bit. There's a lot of data that people with disabilities, they tend to come and stay longer when they're visiting locations because it can take, they want to do the same number of things, but maybe they can't do it at the same pace as somebody else. So they tend to stay a few extra days. Then they also come with somebody usually. For example, I have to travel on an airplane with somebody. I can't go by myself. So whenever I want to go somewhere, I have to pay for 2 tickets to get there. And that person also, they buy their souvenirs to go home with. They buy their food there as well. So just me deciding to go to a location almost all of a sudden doubles the economic impact that I would have if I had gone on my own.
One of the most common complaints about accessibility that I hear is that it's too cost prohibitive. It's money to install this elevator. It's tough to install this ramp. No one's going to use it. There's not a lot of disabled people, so why bother?
One of the things I do, because maybe someone says, well, I've only seen one wheelchair user this week, that's an outlier, why do I want to change my issues? And I say, well, think of grandma in Miami, think of abuela, think of tia, the aunt, think of people, think of your parents.
Disabled people want to have fun too. They want to go out to dinner. They want to go to movies. They want to sing karaoke. And business is just not tapping into that market.
15% of the world's population is disabled. There are, and that's not accounting for old people, parents with small children, others who use accessible devices.
It should be considered unthinkable to leave anybody out, to leave their potential locked in their bedroom or in their apartment, or limit the number of places where they can go team up and collaborate and exchange ideas and make economic transactions, exchange socially with others. To limit that to just 1 or 2 places in their neighborhood instead of the whole, it makes no sense.
There's also a lot of, I think, loyalty and the impact it has on families. For example, when I was young, my family would only ever choose to go on vacations to places that I could go to as well. So we were in a family of 5, so that meant that there's a lot of people 5 people choosing where they're going to visit based on one person's needs and how well they can be fulfilled.
If you had built inclusively from the start, you'd be gaining all the people who come with disabled people as potential clients, customers. You'd be improving the conditions, less complaints. You'd be avoiding lawsuits. And the truth of the matter is, there is incentive in the long term to become accessible.
The Berkeley Center for Independent Living emerged from the independent living movement of the 1960s. And between 1975 and 2011, its headquarters was near the campus of the University of California at Berkeley.
Its goal was, hey, we don't have to live in nursing homes. We don't have to live at our parents' house. We don't have to live in facilities, asylums. We can live independently. And let's try to figure out what it takes to do that. You see Berkeley really sort of attracting and inspiring all of these sort of activist disability leaders. In Japan, you had this company called Duskin, which is in Japan mostly known for its air conditioning and cleaning supply business. They started this sort of leadership fellowship program. They sent a few disabled leaders in Japan to Berkeley, and they were participated in the Center for Independent Living.
So Masako Okuhira is one of the first generation of disability activists and advocates from Japan who traveled to the United States after the United Nations International Year of Disabled Persons in 1981. She went to Berkeley where she met up with Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, some of the most famous American disability rights activists, and learned from them some of the strategies that they were using to work on disability access and inclusion.
Many Japanese young disabled people visited the States and had great experiences. So, we brought back many things to Japan.
And not only did she learn from these famous activists, but she actually helped facilitate their interventions in Japan by inviting them over alongside some other disability activists from other parts of the world to help discuss what accessibility and inclusion could mean, not just in the Japanese context, but in a global context.
I was taught many things from them. And then I start to realize it is a civil rights issue. Then, because at that time I was an architect, so I know Japanese law. Then I thought, there's no civil rights chapter in our law.
It just absolutely transformed Japan. All of the kids who were born since 1990, and I think Mark was born in 91, are really the ADA generation of children. They were born into a United States that had the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what changed for them was they had this profound belief that access was a civil right. Right? They were born into a world that said, you have, as a disabled person, the right to move freely, to live life to the fullest.
The ADA was adopted around the time I graduated from undergraduate school. And of course, it has folded into effect. It started as an interesting national headline and later became part and parcel of how everything in the built environment is reviewed. And so it rose in importance and profile over the years that followed. States and local governments were grappling with the act, trying to understand exactly what that meant they could and couldn't do, what they should be funding, what they should be requiring. And it took a little while for that to become clear. But I think now people realize that the ADA is more than the dimensions of the door so the wheelchair can go back and forth, or the dimensions of a bathroom in a commercial space or a restaurant. There's an aspirational aspect to the ADA, which means we really should be, if we want to fulfill the spirit of the law, we should be trying to go above the minimum compliance in the rule books.
Miami, you would think, would be wonderful because we have year-round good warm weather, but we close down the sidewalk for construction. We block the entire sidewalk. To me, that's crazy because you look at old postcards of New York when they're building the Empire State Building or some skyscraper that's 100 years old or close to, they had the scaffolding because you had to move human beings. It's like that somehow the scaffolding has not made it south of the Mason-Dixon line, and we haven't learned that here. You just run out for a ham sandwich at lunch. Because that sidewalk's blocked, you have to cross the street once, go down the street, cross it again to get on your same side of the street to get to the sandwich shop, repeat. That's 4 exposures to dangerous traffic that do not need to be there if you just build a simple scaffolding. It's like the war on pedestrians.
I want to change our society. What the government should do is to admit the concept of the civil rights and make a plan for decades or 2 decades or 3 decades to change our society accessible.
In Japan, we have been learning much from this great achievement in the promotion of the civil rights of persons with disabilities.
If you have experience in understanding people with disabilities, you have experience in accessibility, you have experience in, for example, ideas of universal design, you are much better positioned to be able to tackle those kind of demographic challenges than if you had ignored those issues before.
The changes that we have to make in the built environment to make it more accessible to folks who are moving around differently, like someone in a wheelchair, for example, often are changes that actually improve the built environment for everyone else as well. They make it safer, more beautiful, they give us a chance to touch up, polish the design details that affect everyday life.
Right? Things that might have initially gotten labeled as for disabled people, people are just seeing as part of the natural environment. Whether it's automatic door openers or a ramp on the side of the building, right? How many people have used the ramp to push their baby carriage?
There's not some moment in the timeline where you say, okay, it's time to start thinking about universal access or accessibility. You begin thinking about it from the very beginning. And I think the reason why is very obvious. If you wait until the end to try and fix it with patches and Band-Aids, it's going to be a lot harder, it's going to work a lot less well than if you think about it from the beginning.
I look at universal design as far as if you just build something safe and accessible and ease of use, that serves everybody.
People in Japan think I'm a specialist of universal design and I'm a specialist of accessibility, but I'm a very unusual Japanese, they said, because I say everything very straight. So therefore, it's easy to talk about the accessibility issue with foreign people, especially American people. But talking about Japanese people of accessibility, I'm too radical.
We need to all be included in the decision-making as to what kind of society we want to live in going forward. Mark mentioned that his life is like a puzzle, and it's true. But the fact of the matter is all of our lives are like puzzles. We all are interconnected in the ways that we build society, and when the rooms are more inclusive for how we build our society, it is going to be a better society.
Disability is such a large minority. It affects so many people. It is the only thing that can happen to anyone at any given time.
Everyone is touched by limited ability at some point in their life. Even if it's just when they reach toward the end of their lives, age brings about disability. If they're lucky enough to live long enough that they start having a little more trouble getting up and down the stairs, they're going to start to relate to the other people who have that difficulty from the day they're born or from their teenage years or their 20s. And so I think we really need to stop thinking of the population in segments according to disability. The disability is of these people over here in this category, and then there's the others, because that will invariably lead us to forget that there are widely varying degrees of disability. I'm actually almost blind without these. My eyesight's growing worse. I know eventually I'll have a problem that will be legally definable as a disability if I live that long.
This is an issue, and this is an international issue, and it affects everyone.
Japan has the world's fastest aging population. When roughly 30% of your population is over the age of 65, you don't necessarily have the train station available to pull out a ramp for me. In fact, right now, roughly 50% of train stations in Japan operate without personnel. So, with that in mind, there wasn't necessarily enough human labor to fix a lot of these barriers.
The pressure from the domestic activities and the pressure from the foreign countries and the pressure from the aging society, scary of the aging society, has pushed the back of our government attitude, and the government started to put a big amount of money, budget, to change the physical situation in Japan.
We are rapidly aging, and there are not going to be the caregivers the young people to take care of us. And as a result, there's been a ton of money being put into how can we change things to make Japan more accessible. If more of us are not going to be able to climb stairs, what are we going to do about all of these subway stations that are inaccessible? If more of us are not going to be able to, go to the bathroom without assistance, how are we going to make bathrooms more accessible? So there's been this huge societal investment at this point to try to make things more accessible before the calamitous crash that's going to happen.
As we go through our lives, everyone, whether they want to or not, whether they want to believe this or not, is going to deal with disability. They may end up losing their hearing, glaucoma, losing their vision, need a hip replacement, need a knee replacement, intellectual disability, and Alzheimer's.
At the end of the day, your needs are going to change. And you want to be in a position where when your needs change, you are ready for that.
The disability space, it can happen at any time to any of us. And the idea of that exposure and that experience potentially prepares us for those moments in the future.
In 2020, Mark consulted for the Paralympic Games scheduled to be held in Tokyo. The pandemic postponed the Games until 2021, and Mark's place as a world-renowned disability advocate and consultant was sealed.
The Paralympics became the sort of crystallizing moment for all these different organizations, from governments to sort of non-government organizations, disabled people's organizations, to say, hey, if we're going to make this investment, let's use the Paralympics as this moment. It also became this moment for Japan to show inclusion. So Mark can work with all those organizations that were really unprepared for the unfolding of the Paralympics and really able to talk to them about what they needed to do.
I hope Mark knows that he has changed the world already, that he has changed the Penn campus, that he has changed our department, the way we think about accessibility.
I always appreciate talking to him. After having a chat with Mark, I always, feel that I've been encouraged and I've learned something and I've been challenged all at the same time.
Mark is very, very passionate about what he does. He just feels like he has so much to give and so much to offer, and he just wants to keep doing it. He doesn't even want to sleep. He wants to just be up 24/7. He believes that this is his purpose in this life.
He's a really sensitive, caring guy, and I think that he always was. And I think that there's a, there's a puffed out chest Mark Bookman because he knows how bright he is, but then there's also a Mark Bookman who really cares about people.
Mark Bookman seems superhuman. He makes it look easy. I don't think it's easy.
On December 16, 2022, and only 6 weeks after filming his interviews, Dr. Mark Bookman died of a heart attack at his apartment in Tokyo. He was only 31 years old. Though Rio, Mark's best friend and primary aide, called Paul to tell him Mark had collapsed, it was a call from an English-speaking nurse at the University of Tokyo Hospital that confirmed the devastating news.
I get on the phone, and he explained that Mark collapsed at home. When the paramedics got there, he was in asystole, meaning he had no heartbeat at all. And they tried to revive him at the apartment. They brought him to the hospital. They'd worked on him for as long as they could. And I'll never forget, he said, "We were not able to resuscitate him." So I remember just saying, "So you're saying that he's dead?" And he said, "Yes, I'm sorry." After they told me that he passed, I had to talk to Mark's sister and let her know, which was going to be very difficult, knowing that she has the same disease and knowing what psychologically this would do to her.
You know, Dad said the doctors had called, and he sort of told me that they think he might have had a heart attack, but they don't know for sure. Then we spoke to Mark's friend Rio, who's also his caregiver, and he sort of gave us the timeline and step by step, like he read the caregiver notes of what happened. And by that point, Dad was already on a flight over there, and yeah.
I was not too familiar with the cremation, so the whole concept was a bit foreign to me. But again, knowing it was a Buddhist tradition, I felt I owed that to Mark. So my wife and I picked out what we thought would be a nice urn that Mark would want to be in. And we had a picture enlarged, which was to my knowledge, the last picture taken of Mark alive, which was taken just a few days before he passed, and had that enlarged. And I brought that home, and on a counter in my where I live, I have Mark's urn, I have the picture. Rio's mother, his aide and friend, gave me, they're little Japanese figurines. I don't know what the term is in Japanese, but, you know, they're kind of, if you know the American version of the toy, they were called Weebles, or Weebles Wobble, but they don't fall down. And she gave me a couple of little ones, and it was a gift for Mark, and she said it reminded her of Mark. And when I thought about it, it was because Mark got knocked down so many times, but he always got up. Wheelchair, heart transplant, you name it, you know, he always got up. You know, illnesses, you know, hospitalizations where, oh, it's not looking good. He's got acute rejection, it's not looking good. Mark always bounced back.
There were times he would really worry about his heart, like he would wake up from night having nightmares, and his nightmare was always about heart failure, heart surgery. So I think maybe deep down he kind of knew that was going to happen one day, and working hard was something that's been really helpful for him to cope with.
He was getting ready to make a change professionally, to move from one position to a new job. And he was worried that he wasn't making enough demands for the new job. And so he was asking me questions like, do you think I should ask for more money? And then he'd say, then again, what am I worried about? I don't need to save for my retirement, ha ha ha. And one thing that I think he enjoyed was that he could have a bit of a gallows humor with me, and I wouldn't be like, Mark, don't say that. Despite his dark sense of humor, he really was underneath an optimist, and he believed that he could make lives better for the people around him, and he really did for me, and that's what I miss the most.
Mark Bookman was a kindred spirit in our drive to understand the world and our passion for Japanese culture, language, and history. He was my very, very good friend, and the world will not be the same without him.
At the ground level, a lot of us have lost a really dear friend. A lot of us have lost someone who we thought was a brilliant scholar, who wrote many books that would change the field. More than anything, there's just this incredible hole in the hearts of everyone who knew him, of this incredible individual.
Mark always felt like he had this responsibility to take the lead, to take care of other people, to teach them and help them.
when we would have these tough conversations and, you know, I would be upset or sad or frustrated with the situation, Mark would check me, as he usually would, but he would do so in a way, especially these past few years, and he would say to me, like, to pretty much to check my privilege and look at this life that we live and how lucky we are to be where we are and to have what we have. And yeah, some things aren't great, but you know, we still are able to speak and to use our voice and to advocate.
I think Mark was able to see the glass half full because of his towering intellect. I think he knew that even though his body could not do certain things, his mind could, and he was not going to hold back.
There's a phrase that I like to use, which is, wherever disabled people go, the world becomes a better place. And Mark was that, but on steroids. Wherever he went, suddenly everything became more accessible.
Just by doing the things that mattered to him, Mark made the world better. And he made the disabilities community so proud.
What Mark was so good at was listening to other people. He wasn't a preacher. He didn't want to bulldoze and say, you have to think what I think. You're wrong. He said, okay, tell me what you think. And then he would do the intellectual work to get around it. But he always listened to other people. So sitting around the table and talking was his way of understanding what the obstacles were and then formulating a plan to progress.
I would talk to Mark pretty much every day, either just talking on the phone, texting, FaceTiming, and things like that. What do you got going on, Mark? Oh, I've got to write a paper on this. I've got a deadline for this. I've got to do, it was always work related. I was under the impression that Mark did nothing except sat at his desk in his apartment in Tokyo or at his kitchen table in Tokyo. He did nothing but read and write. And then within 2-3 days after his death, I realized he has hundreds of friends around the world who would have done anything for him, and they were just so appreciative of what he did for them personally, for what he's done for the disability rights movement professionally. But it was that personal connection, that people coming up to me with tears in their eyes, and this is not because they lost a colleague, they lost a friend. And that was probably one of the greatest gifts that I ever received, if you can call it that, after he passed, is learning what he meant to other people other than me.
Ready? A 1 and a 2 and a 3.
People always ask me, how could your parents have helped you through all the challenges that you've been through? What challenges did they face? Clearly, they've been through a ton themselves. My mother was all about keeping me alive, whereas my dad was all about letting me live.
My parents, my mom and dad, they raised us as if we were not disabled. They held us accountable, and they wanted us to accomplish anything that we wanted to do.
So what do I think of my dad? Oh, look, I give you a fair amount of grief, most of it deserved. But let me say this. At the end of the day, I'm sitting in Japan. I work as a historian at one of the nation's top universities. I consult for governments and corporations inside this country and across the world. I'm 31. I don't think many people can say that they're sitting in the position that I am, that they've had the opportunities that I've had, and that they have the ability or the chance to affect the lives of as many people as I've been privileged enough to do. And I recognize that that doesn't come from myself alone. It comes from a community that raised me, and one of the central figures of that community is sitting right next to me. I mean Ron, of course. No.
Always a putz.
Realistically, look, you got me from, being so small when my head was the size of a lime. You were able to fit, your wedding band around my thigh. You got me from a point of frailty and almost certain death. I mean, I remember the doctors saying something to the effect of, he's not going to live past 30 days. Here I am 30 years later. Taking someone from that position of frailty, giving them the nourishment, the encouragement, the empowerment to get them to where they are, where I am, is a feat that, frankly, I can't think of anyone else I know of personally who's been able to give that type of support. And it's frankly made you a role model in my eyes for the type of support that I want to give others. And, yes, I'm cheesy and I make horrible jokes at your expense, again, of which you deserve. But realistically, our relationship for a big part of my life has defined me, continues to define me. And, I hope that if I can do anything, it's to carry forward some of the values that you've instilled in me and bring them to other people as well.
The last time I saw Mark before I went over in the fall of 22 was when I remarried, which was the summer of 2019. He was no longer my boy. He was this well-respected disability advocate. The 2 weeks I was with him, we talked about everything. And we talked about dying, ironically. And I remember we were at dinner one night. I said, to be honest, if I were to go tomorrow, it would be okay. I've accomplished everything I want to accomplish. I hope I don't, but I want you to know that if I did, it's okay. You shouldn't feel sorry for me. And I remember he looked at me and he said, I feel the same exact way, Dad. He goes, I've accomplished everything I set out to do. He said, I've made a change. I've made a change in individuals. I've made a change in policy. He said, I've written articles. I'm on boards. He goes, I've affected a lot of people, which is really what I wanted to do. He said, if my time comes, I'm ready to leave as well. This was the second to last night before I left Tokyo. And then one other little thing, I remember the morning that I was leaving, Mark came to the hotel to say goodbye, and he was waiting outside the hotel, and I gave him a hug, and I looked at him, and I just said, I'm gonna miss you. And I remember giving a hug. I go to the taxi. I literally got in the taxi. I said, excuse me a minute. I got out. I went back. I gave him another hug, and I looked him in the eye and I said, we'll never go this long without seeing each other. And I gave him another hug and a kiss, and I left. And that was the last time I saw him alive. After I got back to the States, after bringing Mark back, I had zero desire to see anybody. I wanted to be at home with my memories, with my wife, with photos. And then I'm sitting at my desk, and as clear as day, I hear Mark's voice, as if he is standing right next to me, yelling in my ear. He said, Dad, strap on a pair and get on with your life.
Accessibility means different things to different people. And sometimes people get left behind.
Mark's work was global. He made the world better. And everyone with a disability who is part of this advocacy has a role to play. And Mark's role was enormous. Everybody knew Mark.
He just cares about other people, and he always tries to help them and trying to make this world better for them or for everyone.
My hope in the future is that people don't treat me differently.
I want people to remember him not just a scholar of disability or an activist, but also a man who had a happy and fruitful life.
Mark is my hero, and I miss him every single day.
Mark-san, I miss you. I treasure the time we had together. Thank you so much.
You did this yourself, you put yourself in this position, and as a parent, there is not a person on this planet that's more proud of their children than I am of you and your sister for those same reasons. I love you, buddy.
I think if there's one goal of this project, it's for us to understand we need to have empathy, we need to work to empower each other, and that means having a conversation with the people around you. It starts with a simple conversation. And if this documentary can do anything to start that conversation, I think it's achieved its goal.